All right, well, welcome everybody to our session on the three P's of your outbound email strategy. If you want to find out what those three P's are, you're going to have to listen pretty closely to James and Andrew in this session. We got James here from Reggie.ai. He's got some great content lined up. And Andrew from Outreach.io, who's kind of our second expert here to weigh in on the best practices and tips and strategies that James will be sharing. James is running the show today, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to them as they come up instead of holding everything to the end. So I'll just let Andrew and James know when there's a question from the audience. Otherwise, James, it's your show.
Hey, Brooklyn, thank you so much for the warm introduction. And yeah, could not be more excited to be here with Andrew today and you yourself, Brooklyn, as we start to dig into, really getting started with your outbound sequences and really thinking about some of the components that make up, a really stellar outbound sequence. But before we go on, Andrew, would love to toss it to you to get a little bit of an introduction from you over at Outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Dave, David, lots of Davids on the call. Alexander, Amanda. Just to get started here, maybe drop in the chat where y'all are coming from, so we can get kind of an idea there, and see where across the world we have everyone. That'd be great. India, nice, very cool, Rajan. Atlanta, Seattle, Boston, Minneapolis, California, amazing, amazing. Madrid, Spain, hola, hola. Cool. People from all around the world. I love seeing that. But nice to see you, everyone. I'm Andrew Newborn. I am on the enterprise growth side over at Outreach.io. I've been with the company for about almost 6 years now, so I've seen it start from the bottom, and now we're here, right? I've seen every type of sequence you can imagine. Great sequences, okay sequences, and just absolutely terrible sequences, half of which I probably wrote. So excited to be here today, y'all, and go through all this with you today. James is going to run the show, but I'm going to be jumping in here and there to engage and kind of add my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. And for those who don't know me, I'm James Reichmuth. I head up customer operations over here at Reggie AI. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Reggie AI, Reggie is a platform that allows you to create, store, analyze, and ultimately optimize your sales sequences. So we've got a platform that integrates with platforms such as Outreach that allows you to build out data-backed, persona-based sequences and export those directly into Outreach. So we're going to talk through today some of the best practices that we advise our customers on, and we're going to share some stories, both from Andrew and myself, on what we've seen in the field. So I always like to kick this off, just high-level agenda. We'll talk about the three Ps. We just covered some of the introductions and company information. And then, what we'll really do at the end of this is tie it all together with, combining those three Ps to really turbocharge that outbound engine. And of course, as you have questions throughout, feel free to drop them in. But Andrew, this is where I like to start because I find that this is always very interesting. Some of the most common questions that we get from new customers when they're getting started off. And oftentimes what we see is really knowing where to start can often be the hardest part. So understanding the amount of touch points you should include, what's the right mix of calls and emails? Am I being too aggressive? Should I be optimizing other channels? We advise around that. Basically, there's a lot of answers to it. And it depends, largely on your needs. But we frame everything up around the three Ps, and we've got a really stellar system in place that shows that with the right mix, actually increase the ability to actually capture those prospects and get those meetings booked. Because we've got this belief here that if you have a genuine solution to a genuine problem that somebody has, and you're talking to the right person about that problem, you've earned the right to that conversation. And there's so many channels that we can go through there. So often I hear, what should we start with? Andrew, I'd love to know from you, these 5 questions are what we most commonly see. In your experience working with outreach customers especially, what's the mix of questions you typically get regarding sequences in the beginning?
These all hit the nail on the head, but I would say if I had to pick one specifically, it's how many sequences should we have? And I have 2 answers to that. I have the short answer, which is as many as you could manage, and then I have the long answer, which I don't know how much time you have, but we'll go into that today. But the short answer is however many you can manage, from there. But we'll get into more of the tactics there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And for us, when we think about creating new sequences, we start everything at the persona, because as the way that people communicate change, the trends and the way that people communicate and want to be spoken to changes, we also have to track that up against our buyer personas. So in Reggie, for example, you can actually build out all your buyer personas and see all of the content that you've associated with those personas. But we start very simply with folks, because some folks will come in with a level of sophistication where they've done the legwork and already identified all these. And then we have folks on the other end of the spectrum who are just doing this for the first time. And getting started can often be the hardest part. But we like to free people up with some data to begin with. So, 70% of companies that exceed their revenue goals have these well-documented personas. And the reason that that works is because once you get in the rigor and the motion of, constantly re-examining your personas and where your deals are coming from, you'll start to notice trends in your content and the way that you communicate with folks throughout your funnel that will help you improve upon that over and over again. 47% of those companies that exceeded their goals also consistently maintain those personas. So that's where the refinement of the edge comes in. So really looking at, okay, I was able to craft this really stellar pain point and provide a really stellar solution to it here. How can I replicate that? How can I make it more specific to the people that I want to be talking to based on what I've learned through my selling motion, and then based on what I've learned through the customer experience motion in the way that folks communicate once they're using your service or product. And then finally, the big thing, and this is what really freed me up when I really started digging in on personas, is 82% of companies with personas say it helps them create improved value propositions. And that's because personalization at its core can feel really overwhelming. But when you start thinking about your personas as people and you start thinking about your business as a way of creating solutions rather than just selling, you'll find that you'll end up in this motion a lot more where it becomes really easy to see, okay, I know how to talk to this person. I know the challenges that they're experiencing in their day-to-day. I can craft something really compelling and really interesting that adds a lot of value to get them interested in coming and talking to me about my solution. So Andrew, in your experience, like you just said, as many sequences as you can run. Where do you see the importance of personas in that when you're working with customers over at Outreach?
I mean, personas is the basis of everything you're going to write in a sequence, right? So it's almost like, you've all heard this before, pick a character and write for that character, or pick a person and write for that person, pick a persona, write for that persona, right? And when we say write for that persona, what does that mean? That means there's typically around 10 buckets that you can write about, right? Lessons learned, trends, stats, mistakes made, and there's about 10 different buckets there. I won't name them all, but they all have a persona specifically. Let's say it was VPs of sales. They all have mistakes, lessons, problems they want to solve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, without knowing who you're going to talk to, then you can't put the other pieces down the funnel together, right? So again, from a first principles mindset, if you're thinking, okay, I'm going to start going outbound as an organization, or hey, I'm going to start doing outbound sequences as an organization, because I just bought Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever engagement tools out there. What I want to do is I want to start with who am I speaking to, right? And that, again, like nothing else matters if you don't know your persona, because you're just going to be shooting in space, right? So again, defining that persona, it's a lot easier said than done, right? Because what we try and talk about is, one, how do you identify the problems they're facing? It's all about matching problems to solutions, right? But when identifying the problems, there's a trick here that I don't think it's talked about enough, which is how do you portray those problems but stand out from the 50 other reps reaching out to your target persona saying they can solve the same problem as well. And that's where the creativity comes in. But more on that later. We can dive into that later on.
Exactly, 100%. And Andrew, I'm glad you mentioned, making that decision as an organization, because not only, I know this presentation is largely going to be about outbound, but thinking about personas can also help you boost the language that you use in your inbound motion, in your follow-up motion, which is something that we work with our customers on a lot, because as you get more sophisticated with the way that you speak to your outbound prospects and the way you talk to people when they're cold, You can also tailor the way you talk to them as they're coming in to be more in line with the way that folks want to be spoken to. So to tie back into that, original common question around, what's too many touch points, what's too many touch patterns, what you're seeing on your screen in Reggie today as far as the different types of campaigns that we run. So all of these are based off of 1.6 billion rows of performance data and then best practices from our partners at Outreach and across the industry. And what we really start to talk with people, folks, when we start talking about their personas is there's also a science to the way that folks want to be communicated with as far as frequency goes. So for example, in our outbound, we've got some that are more designed for that higher level executive. It's going to be a little bit of a slower sales cycle. It's going to be really focused on value added content. Then on the flip side, we've got some blitz style campaigns that are really great for those leads that are like, high yield, but high volume as well. You really want to get in there and make sure you've got a stellar motion around. And the thing that we often see, it's anywhere between 6 and 21 steps, depending on the use case where things get most effective. But by and large, you want to be between 15 and 21 is a safe spot. Because what you're going to do through that is you're going to generate what's called the stacking effect, where as you're going through each touch point, whether it's email or phone call, you're slowly telling a story throughout this. And this is why it really helps to have that persona in place, because now that you've got that persona in place, you can craft your entire story around that. So, email one, you may come in with some introductory information. You want to establish a pain point that you often see with that buyer and then provide your solution to it. And really through that motion, what you want to ask for is interest. Asking for interest, is this a solution that, is this a challenge that you face in your day-to-day that you could like some support in? Something like that to gauge interest first before asking for that meeting. But through that touch point pattern, you might not get that engagement off the first or second email or even the first phone call. So we'll get questions sometimes of like, hey, am I going to annoy my prospects? And the short answer is some of them, sure. The longer answer is more than likely what's going to happen is you're going to weed out the prospects that you wouldn't want to be working with anyway or who wouldn't be good fits for your product or solution now. But what will actually happen is the conversations that you'll have with the folks that convert down line will end up being more enriched by the story and the value that you added in throughout your sequence. So thinking about how we can continue to give to our prospects in order to generate that interest and have them come back. So at the end of the day, so much of this is getting out of your head with the way that you're thinking about your language, because people want their problem solved and you've got the solution to it. And you should be very upfront about talking about that solution. So, Andrew, for your side of things, obviously Outreach is such a stellar engine as far as being able to generate, a big bulk of sequences and really being able to optimize those for different channels. Would love to get some of your perspective, on customers who come in and when they're first getting started with sequences, some of the hurdles that they have as far as actually crafting those touchpoint patterns.
Yeah, I would say just first off, in implementing something like Outreach, typically the biggest bottleneck for most customers is content, right? Like that slows us down. Probably more than anything else when integrating Outreach into the tech stack. That's because there does need to be a lot of thought put into it, right? But not so much that there's too many cooks in the kitchen. So it's almost an art, right? Marketing may want one thing, sales may want one thing. But here's the thing. Whenever we create a sequence, it starts from an assumption of what we think we know what people want. And this is the idea that I have to portray to new customers is, hey, sure, you have an assumption of what you think you should write down and all the language you should have, but you don't know until you test it and put it out there, right? And so the reframe of how to think about a sequence at the 10,000 foot level is what you're doing is you're making some noise and listening for signal. And that's really the point of a sequence, right? The point is to say, hey, you know what? We have this set of assumptions, and this set of assumptions is that my persona cares about X, Y, and Z. Okay, I'm going to put those into a 12-step sequence. All the emails are going to talk about that, etc. And then what you see, what Outreach is about, what any sales engagement platform is about, is look at the data, right? And see, okay, if I'm comparing sequence 1 and sequence 2, what's giving me some signal here, right? And going back to full circle what I said earlier, how many sequences should you have? you should have as many as you can manage, because the idea is that what you do is it's better to have 2 sequences where you're able to measure and understand how am I validating my assumptions versus 100 sequences and validating nothing, right? And so that's where we start to see sequences are not just a way to get out emails, they're a way to put those assumptions out into the market and verify those by listening to signal, right? And as y'all know, buyers are constantly changing themselves, right? That, your solution may solve 10 different problems, and last week, everyone in the market was worried about, outbound prospecting. Now everyone's worried about converting inbound. Who knows? So again, it's a never ending process, right? And again, 10,000 foot level, like I like talking about the mindset of sequences, which is at the end of the day too, when you have created a sequence, that's step 1, right? You just got started. The real work is on trying to understand how do you optimize that sequence and understand what you're optimizing for, right? So I would say that that's a big shift that I try and make for people, right? Which is the mindset of like, hey, a sequence is not just a way to get automated emails. If you wanted something like that, I have a $5 tool for you, right? But the importance is in understanding that you have a solution that gives you, again, those signals and what to look for.
100%, 100%. I love the way that you've laid that out too, because it is such a motion to get into, and you're absolutely right that like the way that people are, the way that buyers are changing and the way that we communicate with each other is always evolving, and that harkens right back to the importance of like really understanding your buyer persona, because while the industry and the space may be changing around you, you can stay ahead of it by being really diligent about examining, testing, and seeing what works, and exactly like you said, Andrew, what signals are resonating with people as they go. One of the things that we talk a ton about at Reggie is, when we're getting set up, especially if it's for a new product or a new persona that hasn't been, targeted before, we really like go through the gamut on AZ testing. So not just A/B testing the content in a given sequence, but actually AZ testing different sequence types against those personas in order to see where the responses start to come in, so that you can more and more fine tune the way that your touch points need to be and align it to the way that your buyers want to be communicated with, while also aligning it to the way that your team does work. Just a couple of quick statistics here. We ran this analysis over about 136,000 emails in our system, and we started to find a few trends. And one of the most powerful things here, and one of the questions that we get so often is it enough that I just email, or is it enough that I just call? And frankly, it's not. You need to do some mix of the both, especially if you want to be, engaging with your key buyers, and especially if you're dealing with a buyer who's, a little bit further up the chain. What we saw is actually a 98.57% reduction in response if you removed all of the calls out of a given sequence, versus a 93% reduction in response if you just removed the emails. So the calling actually becomes just about as important as the emails themselves, but the emails themselves also inform so much of what you can do on those calls and how you can navigate those calls. So I find that really interesting. And Andrew, like I toss it back to you there too. I'd love to understand, what you see as the mix between emails and phone calls, and where do you see people in your experience get hung up there?
Oh yeah, that's a loaded question. I would say it's a very common question, which is how many emails should I have? How many calls should I have? How many other items should I have? And again, the answer is it depends, right? And I know everyone's favorite answer, right? But it depends on again, going back to the persona. It depends on the persona you're targeting, right? If you're targeting IT folks, they typically don't like phone calls, right? So maybe if it's more email based. Again, this all goes back to your platform, which is persona, right? So again, it depends. Now, the other piece here that I would say is like what we don't want to get caught up on, and what I urge customers not to get caught up on when it comes to like how many emails, how many calls, is it's not about the quantity of steps, right? It's not about 12, 13, 15, 17 steps, right? That's like trying to write a LinkedIn post or an article and saying, it needs to be 2,000 words. Like, just because it needs to be 2,000 words, you could probably write the same thing in 100 words that's just as powerful. The Constitution, I think, is like 100 words, right, of the U.S. or something crazy like that. And it's the basis of a country. So, my point there being that the sequence, the number of steps you should have, the types of steps is enough to provide value where someone will want to have a conversation with you. So what does that mean? That means that you're going through a sequence and you're not asking someone for 30 minutes of their time. I always in implementation say no one's just going to randomly say, hey, let me give you 30 minutes of my time. There is slight chances. Those are anomalies, right? When you hit someone at the right time, it's a little bit of luck. But overall, what you're doing is you're not creating a sequence goal is not a call to action. It's a call to conversation. So your goal is to get a conversation started and then to say, this piqued my curiosity. You created a curiosity gap. I understand that I'm at point A. I'm trying to get to point Z. What are B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P? What's the middle part there? And how are you that middle layer there to get me to Z? Right? And so that's the art of writing in general, but also writing sequence content, coming up with that content is how do you create that curiosity gap enough for them to say, hey, what, tell me a little bit more about this, how you get me from A to Z. And that's that transformation, right? And you want them to see themselves in that.
100%, 100%. And that leads us, directly into the pain element of this, which is such an important, critical part of writing sequences in general. Is like really understanding the unique problems that your personas have. So you've done the legwork, you've identified your personas, you're starting to talk to yourself about, okay, what's worked in the past, what's most relevant to my buyers right now. And then, you really want to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, like what are the anxieties that I have in my day to day? What pressure am I getting from my boss? What pressure am I getting from my direct reports? What pressure do I have in my job in general? And then you can map that very one-to-one to your solution, and you can really customize it towards that business need, which we'll talk about more in just a second when we talk about personalization, but you can really customize it around that business need to start to generate that interest by, having some foresight into the challenges that they're solving there right now. Decision makers are about 50% more likely, according to Google, to buy a product or service if they can see that personal value in it instead of just the company value. So what it is it's really a marriage and a mix of really understanding the work that your buyers do in general so that you can customize your content, more robustly around that. And it can be a very simple exercise. One thing that we'll go through with our customers is we'll come in, we'll identify their personas, and then we'll very tactfully talk through, okay, like what are all of the value added pieces that you do here through your product or service? How can we reverse engineer that pain back to that persona there? That way you've got a clear flow through the entire process of your persona, your pain, and then your personalization through your value proposition.
Hey, James, we got a question from David in the chat here. Is that all right?
Hey, David, of course.
Going back to your stats on phone versus email, he asks, since many of my prospects work from home and not in an office where a phone sits on their desk, how can I reach the prospect when they work from home? How do you take that into account from the prospecting stage?
Yeah, Brooklyn, I think I lost you a little bit at the end there. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry about that. His question was, how can I reach the prospect when they're working from home, when maybe you might just have their office number?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, and it's going to vary by prospect, obviously, and what data is available. One thing that a lot of our customers take advantage of is a data source that can verify some of this information, like a Zoom info or a sales intel. But frankly, with the sequence itself, as you encounter folks who don't have those numbers in, that might not be at their office phone, you can still give that phone number a call, leave that voicemail, but continue down your other paths. And really, this is where it comes back in with the importance of like identifying your other buyers. Because when you're doing any account-based marketing or any account-based selling through your sales motion, it's important to be multi-threaded in any organization, right? So if you can't get a phone number for somebody here, maybe you can get a phone number for an adjacent contact or somebody that could be a champion at the organization that you could get in through there, get a referral to the ultimate buyer that way. But to answer that directly as well, that is also where the importance of the other types of steps come in. So the social media steps, connecting and engaging on LinkedIn, and then also the email steps themselves, because you do have to capture people where they are. And some folks and some buyer personas are going to be more prone to being tied to their phone than others. That's an excellent question. And Andrew, I'd toss it to you as well.
Yeah, so this one's gonna get interesting because obviously everyone working remote is a little bit different. So, and yes, you can incorporate this into a sequence. I'm going to preface with that, but the big thing is now when you think about your personas, what you want to think about is meeting them where they're at. Okay, so they don't have an office phone anymore. Okay, you don't have their cell phone data. So okay, you still have their email. What else do you have? You have wherever they're consuming content. That could be LinkedIn, that could be Reddit, that could be YouTube, that could be, wherever these personas are consuming their content. And so what I like to say is that the new being on site in sales is being on your prospect's feed. And that feed is wherever they hang out online. So for me, it's LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn's a gold mine for me. So, when I think about this and what I see some of the, fast growing top startups that are like, really pushing the limits doing is they're adding steps in there to their sequences where reps are creating content that makes them look like the trusted advisor of the problem they solve. Right. And yes, it's a little more work, but think about this. An email that gets sent to, that gets sent out, maybe, you'll get one view if you're lucky, right? Maybe a couple views, depending on how many you send it to. But a piece of content can be seen by thousands, right? Like if you go on LinkedIn today, and again, I'm using LinkedIn because that's, my world, but, you can make a post, it can be a terrible post and get at least 100 views, right? It's almost like a sales rep working for you 24/7 for free. And, minus your time, of course, but, and it doesn't have to be complicated. So that's the big shift that companies, I would say, a lot don't understand yet, but are starting to see, right? And so when we think of sequences, they don't have to be emails, they don't have to be calls, they have to be meeting your prospects where they're at, right? And so again, getting into the creativity here, how do you incorporate steps like that, like creating content, into your sequencing? And I think that is so underrated, so underutilized. And if y'all want to get ahead, like that's the way, right? Look at some of the startups all over LinkedIn. That's intentional. Outreach, we're all over LinkedIn. That's intentional. We're pushing. We're not forcing reps to do it, but it's encouraged, right? Gong, you'll see the same thing, right? And guess what? I mean, they're all over the feed, and people say, "Oh, they have such a great brand. How did they do that?" That's just, again, leveraging their army of employees in order to push out what it is they solve. So, yeah.
100%, 100%. And that goes back to again, just to keep hammering home the importance of that persona and then the pain. And now we're going to talk a little bit about personalization. And Andrew, as you were talking, it actually, reminded me one of the things that we see, most often and end up being successful for folks when it comes to this is establishing some sort of content committee. And we often see this work really well when it's somebody from sales, somebody from marketing, who's got overall vision around the product or service that you're going after. Because to your point, Andrew, about meeting people where they're at, that's where some of the other activities that your organization or your team does will inform how easy or how difficult it is with your outbound selling motion. Because the presence that you have on the web or where your prospects are and the content that they're consuming for your organization there also needs to be geared towards their specific problems and their specific pain points so that you can have more enriched conversations with these folks as you're trying to reach out to them. A couple of additional statistics that we found: 72% of buyers will actually only engage with content that's personalized to them in some method. Otherwise, they're more than likely to mark it as spam. And 63% of purchasers will completely stop purchasing from a brand that doesn't personalize any content to them. And this largely goes into the psychology of, we have a ton of time. Time is a really scarce resource right now. And so as you're trying to figure out the different ways to engage with folks and the way that you want to be engaged with yourself, think about the relationships that you have. So much of selling, so much of marketing is ultimately a relationship game where we're trying to build relationships and then pile onto those relationships and solve really great problems with each other. And if you're not doing any level of personalization there, you're just, stating your solution, like sending it out into the void, you're going to miss a lot of people that otherwise would have engaged with you. They just might not know or might not be educated enough on how your solution actually ties into what their need is. And I also like to call out this data piece at the end here. 81% of people believe that companies use too much of their personal data. And how this relates to personalization, and one question I often get is like, hey, James, what is the right balance of personalization here? And I saw a lot early on in my career, especially where folks were trying to figure out like, locality, like do we have a shared alma mater, something like that that's like very unique to the prospect itself. And what we're seeing in our email content is it's actually shifting that if you can make the content itself personal around the pain that they are likely to experience in their role, that's enough personalization to get the conversation going. And then you can layer in all of those deeper relationship aspects the more that you get in that conversation, the deeper conversations you have with those buyers. So the personalization piece becomes very important in tying this whole thing together and making sure that your sequences are very top of the line and very targeted towards the people that you actually want to be communicating with.
While we're on personalization, James, Rajan in the chat here was asking it for an example of persona-based outbound done well. Talked a lot about the do's and don'ts, but I don't know if either of you have some examples of what this looks like in practice.
Absolutely. Happy to share a couple of examples here. And I'll actually pull up this slide here because we'll talk about some of the general email best practices that we see work the best for our customers and our sales motion itself, honestly. But a really good email is going to have a subject line that's between 2 and 4 words. We're definitely seeing more of a shift to the 2-word subject line here. And that subject line should also have some element of curiosity-based personalization in it. Because what you want to do between your subject line and the preview text that you see in your inbox when you're scrolling through your desktop or scrolling through mobile, is you want to generate some curiosity in that preview text there. So thinking about how your subject lines tie into the first line of your email to get directly to the prospect, making it about them and the pain that they are experiencing in. That way they'll be compelled to open the email and then boom, you'll have your stellar solution right there ready for them with some hopefully additional value added language so that you can ultimately have a deeper conversation with them. So you want to start off with a subject line, between 2 to 4 words, and then all of your personalization should happen in that very first line. So you know who you're speaking to, you know who your persona is, immediately jump in with them and acknowledge like, hey, you're very busy. When I speak to folks in this industry, I often see this challenge. Here's how we solve it. And what will happen the more that you do that and the more that you test that out is you'll find the different language patterns that work best for your business and for your prospects. So personalizing those lines will also get easier and easier over time. Then you think about the body of the email itself. So this is where you really want to clearly explain your value proposition, maybe reference a couple success stories, success metrics, other ways that customers in their space have added or gained value through using your product or service, because that can also establish credibility, and that can also act as another mechanism of personalization to make that email feel like, wow, okay, not only are they establishing and acknowledging that they understand this problem that I have, but they're also showing me how they've solved that problem for customers that I know and I really like. And then finally, in your ask section, you want to keep your CTA very brief and direct. If you're doing pure cold outbound, typically better to lead with an interest-based CTA. So asking more along the lines of, if this is a challenge for you, would it make sense for us to connect more to learn more about how we can support you? Versus asking like, hey, does Tuesday at 2 o'clock make sense for a quick phone call? That said, though, that flips if you're dealing with a prospect who's been warmed up a bit. So deeper in sequence, what we often see is that CTA will change from being interest-based to being more focused around a specific day and time to help generate that law of scarcity and ultimately induce that meeting into happening. Andrew, I'll toss it over to you as well here. I would love to hear any stories that you've got related to stellar emails that you've seen in your day.
Yeah, so let's talk about. I think would be interesting is quick win sequences, right? And so, like, if we look at quick win sequences, there's an example I would like to talk about, which is how can you create a sequence where the asked what you're offering actually is a no-brainer, right? So let's call it the no-brainer sequence. What's something you can offer that's a no-brainer? Let me give you all an example. Right, we sell to CMOs, we sell to VPs of sales, and so we had a sequence building competition, and it was whoever can build the best sequence got like a gift card or something. Who knows? But so I went and built a sequence, And that sequence, I was like, okay, what's a no-brainer I can offer? I was like, I'm going to target CMOs, and what do they want every day? They want exposure. Their job is getting exposure for their company. And so what's a no-brainer? Well, a no-brainer in that case is, hey, let's get you on our podcast, which is pushed out to tens of thousands of people. You'll get exposure for you. We'll have you on the podcast. And then at the end of the day, what also happens is not only is it a win for him, but or her, it's a win for me as well, because now I've created a relationship with that CMO. I've got them on a podcast. I'm not trying to sell them directly. Again, I made it a call to conversation. And in that conversation, when I get them on the podcast, I'm basically giving him or her questions that are around problems that my solution solves, right? And so that's a no-brainer sequence. That was an offer that was irresistible for that specific persona, right? Why wouldn't they? So when we think about sequences, I wanted this to be super valuable for y'all as you're listening here and still here. Is that, like, think of those offers you can give, whether it's a marketing event that's going on, say your company's putting on your cooking class, or they're doing some event with like a best-selling author. Like, what's something that people cannot say no to? Leverage that to just get a conversation, because 99% of the time you reaching out and just saying, hey, let's hop on a call, it's not going to work, right? And so that's short-term thinking. But what you want to shift to and reframe to is like that long-term thinking. How do I get a small yes? And then after that small yes, how do I get another small yes? And then after that yes, how do I get another small yes? So you're almost climbing a ladder of many yeses to get to that big yes, which is, hey, yes, I'll take a meeting so that we can start evaluation and actually take this seriously, right? And again, we live in a world, and it's hard. It's not easy to do that. Why is it so hard? Because we live in a world where we can push a button and have a car here to go wherever we need, right? It's all like, get it now. And unfortunately, like, people giving their time up is not something they'll just do right away, right? And so we always have to go back and say, well, you know what are the small yeses I can get in order to get that large yes, right? And that's not easy to do, because us reps, us sales leaders, we just want to say them to say, yes, I know you need it. Just hop on with me, please. Like, I promise you need this. But again, shift that a little bit. What are some small yeses you can get? And if those small yeses are no brainers for them, even better.
100%. I love that example, Andrew, because there's so much value you can drive, even in the small one-off sequences that you might put together like that. Really focused around quick wins. And then, ultimately, at the end of the day, as long as you are going back and you're trying to, as you're going through and getting those yeses, every time you're trying to get that next yes, your intent is to solve a problem for this person, you're going to be golden, and that conversation is just going to keep flowing more and more naturally. It's fantastic.
And jump in with one follow-up question. Jenna earlier asked, I think you walked through some great examples of how to make it great. I know the answer is probably it depends, but what would you say you could expect a response rate to look like if you're putting all these best practices in place for your own template and your own sequence?
Yep. So you go ahead first, Andrew.
I'll chime in here. So first off, great question, Jenna. Nice to see you, by the way. So I would say, like, again, it depends, but that CMO sequence I just told you about to get them on a podcast, my response rate was like over 50%, right? Why? Because I'm giving them a no-brainer. That no-brainer is them and their company getting pushed out to tens of thousands of people. So it all comes down to the offer, right? Anything you buy online, think of like an e-commerce product you bought online. What did I recently buy online? Oh, this hat that, like, you can, I get super sweaty when I go golfing. So like, it's this hat that's waterproof and it's amazing. And like, the offer to me was irresistible. It was like, I have this problem and I need this hat because, like, I ruin all my other hats because I get so sweaty, right? And so, the offer again was irresistible. So what you can almost do from that is, again, to give y'all something tactical to take home, is think reverse engineer that irresistible offer you have, and then work backwards on how you get your personas aware of that offer to get a response. So start with the offer, right? And again, write down the common offers that people give, which is 15 minutes, 30 minutes. That's not offering them anything. That's taking away from them their time initially until they understand the true value, right? Because typically a one email is not going to give them the true value. So find those offers in your organization, work with marketing to come up with those offers, figure out what's available out there as a great offer that you can do, and then align that sequence to that.
I would completely echo all that, Andrew. And I would just add, one of the other things to consider there is as you're going through your testing on this, especially if, you're working with a persona that you haven't worked with before, or maybe you're just getting started in that realm of like really getting diligent with your sequences being highly targeted. One of the things that you'll want to do at the beginning there is, find some benchmarking information relative to your industry. I know HubSpot has a lot of great tools for this, and set an initial target. And don't set an insane target, but really what you want to see is you want to understand the baseline for your industry. You want to understand and capture a baseline for your sequences, and then through the iteration and maintenance process of those sequences, and as you revise that content, what you want to track is that the reply rates, the open rates, all that trend upward. Because we'll often see, some folks will come in and their sequences will be, at a, between 10 and 15%, and then they'll start getting more targeted with their sequences, and then we'll see, exactly what Andrew just described, where, you get something that's really value added, that's really hard to say no to, and suddenly your response rates are going up, plus 50%. Any other questions?
Let's hear. There's got to be some out there. Let's see here. Who's in the chat? Any in the chat? Any out there? Patty, anything from you? Mark from Reno. David, Lisa. Let's hear. I know I'm just calling on people, but would love to hear any questions y'all have. Preference on email subject lines, long or short. There's a depends on all of this, and when I say depends, that's because the takeaway for every it depends is that again, going back to the beginning, is you have assumptions. We all think we know, right? And there'll be gurus out there that say, hey, this subject line will work, or this subject line will work. And that's all an assumption, because HubSpot used to put out, when you send your email at this time, it works best. But that's an assumption. What we have to do is get smart. And by getting smart, we actually say, what are some subject lines that I think are great? Let me try them out. And then let me look for that signal and see what actually works. So I'll be honest with you. I've used super short subject lines. They've worked. I've used super long subject lines and they have worked. Again, it just depends, right? So assuming in most cases with personal emails to persona text only, I'm not too sure about that question, Sean. Assuming in most cases with personal emails to persona text only. Oh, do you use text only? I like to say that people love video right now, but again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you all that because I don't know for sure. But I'll tell you what I respond to is video, creativity, or funny meme images, right? That, if you can add a sense of humor, like people want to be educated and entertained. That's why TikTok is taking off, right? And so whenever you think of these emails that you're writing in a sequence, think you're competing with TikTok, right? So that's the bar, because they see their inbox. I'll tell you, executives love TikTok and Instagram. Whenever I'm in the office, yeah, I'll see them on Instagram just hanging out. Like they're people, right? They're on there. So they're trying to be educated and entertained. So when you think about it, if that's video, if that's image, if that's just text for your organization, you have awesome copywriters, whatever it is, use what hits those two items there, right? And again, that way you prevent people from going, from looking at their inbox to TikTok. How do you stop them from going to TikTok, right, with your email? That's the goal.
100%.
Andrew, you mentioned copywriting. Sorry, James.
Go ahead.
Like whether you have the copywriters take it on or your reps, Lou raised a really good point. That the hardest part of developing their sequences is the copywriting, making it natural, not salesy, not cheesy. What advice do you have for, I mean, who handles that? Are reps writing their sequences? Do you rely on sales enablement? Do you outsource to a copywriter? What's kind of best practice there, if there is one?
Yeah. So that's a really, really excellent question. It's something that we solve a lot through our product and then through our onboarding motion is identifying the folks at an organization who really should be in charge of this. Um, so to tie back to what I had mentioned, I think on the personalization slide, one thing that we are starting to see work more and more for companies is identifying some sort of content committee. And typically this is going to be somebody from the marketing realm, it's going to be somebody from the sales realm, but ultimately like they're going to be the ones who have the final say over the types of copy that get written, types of sequences that you're running. And what ends up happening there, the more that you work in that system, is you start to find that you'll actually be generating better ideas more quickly because you're setting up a system where your company can offer up different perspectives based on what they're seeing in their particular vertical. So on the marketing side, you might be seeing more responses on the inbound side. On the sales side, you might be, actually having those customer conversations, those prospect conversations. You can collaborate to help build all of that out. And then, depending on the tool stack you use, there's a lot of tools out there. Reggie also has a copywriting component to it where we use AI to generate personalized cold email messages. So whether it's a tool or whether it is, you just writing brute force through this, one of the best things I could recommend is work with some folks in your organization to really operationalize that process so that you can get that global perspective.
Yeah, in Brooklyn, I don't know if you asked that, maybe who asked that, but that Brooklyn knows specifically. I'm super passionate about this, but and I'm gonna go on a rant here for a second. I'm just warning y'all. So here it goes. Here it goes. The best enablement you can give your sales team or anyone that writes emails for a living is copywriting classes or courses. That is the best enablement you could give. Why? Because think about it. The basis of what reps or people creating sequences do all day is writing. So it blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind that and again, not to get too much into it, but in like college or, in enablement or in anything that's taught, we don't teach the basics of copywriting and copywriting techniques that capture attention, right? When that is the fundamental basis of everything a seller does, of writing, not only writing sequence emails, but you start writing when you create a video, you start writing when you create a presentation, you start writing when you outline anything that you're going to put out there. And in a remote world, that's pretty much all we're doing. So, the best thing you can do for sequence creation is improving response rates, making your people better sellers, is have them study copywriting. And it's the greatest weapon that anyone has in the world, right? Because the power of words and writing, you can do anything you want these days with the internet, right? So again, teach them how to write. That's the best enablement. I've gone through 7, 8 outreach. I've gone through all the best sales trainings out there, and I will still tell you the best sales training I've ever had is a 99-cent copywriting course that I paid for. So recommended resources, tweet. Sean. Yeah, there's the tweet. There's the tweet. All right. So Sean asked recommended resources for copywriting. I have a free community. It's not even 99 cents. It's free 99, right? It's cheap. Brand 30. Go to brand30.io. Come do that. We do a cohort every month. It's completely free. Why? Because I feel so strongly about this subject that like I want to make great sellers long term, and I want to be in the selling community. And I think people should learn copywriting. So there's that. Other resources. There's a couple books you should read. 3 books. The Boron Letters is one of them. That is like, just read it. It's amazing. It also teaches you lessons on adulting that stick with you. Copywriting Secrets. Go on Amazon, check that one out. And then the third one is On Advertising by David Ogilvy. Right? Those 3, you'll know everything you need to know about like copywriting, right? And read them over and over and over again, right? So brand30.io, Lou, I'll put it in there. Go join. And it's building your personal brand through writing, right? And that's the idea. So go join. Again, if you want other copywriting resources, go on LinkedIn, go on the channels that you live on, and look at what is working. Do active scrolling, not passive scrolling where you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna kind of scroll. Do active scrolling, see what's getting a lot of likes, see what's working, and look at it and say, why do I think that worked? Right? Was it the headline? Was it the structure of the post? Was it the formatting? What was it that worked? So yes, that's what I would say do, right? Like just actively when you're scrolling, that's the easiest thing you can do starting like right after this call. Right. Or if you're even on this call multitasking, like maybe I was too late 5 minutes ago, right? So yeah, when you're scrolling, just look and say, why did this work? And that's the one thing you can do today if you don't want to sit down and read a book. Okay. So yeah, that's what I had to say. And I warned y'all, I was going on a rant.
I enjoyed the rants, and I couldn't agree more with those book recommendations, especially Andrew. I mean, those are just some incredible use cases there. One of the other things that you can do really fast to just get a quick gut check on how your content is, send it to yourself and take a look at it on your phone and like really examine the headline and the initial text that you see there, and like ask yourself and be honest with yourself, like, would you open and engage with that? If not, probably some more work to do.
Let's switch gears. We got a lot more questions in the chat. Thank you both. John was wondering, so objection handling or rejection looks pretty different over cold call than it does over email. So what's your tips for overcoming objections and rejection via email?
Yeah,
Or is it to just add in the call?
Yeah, overcoming rejection via email is going to be very similar to overcoming rejection via call. I always recommend, do at least one response back to them and then one follow-up to them if they don't respond, and ask them a couple of more curiosity-based questions. Because really what you're trying to find is you're trying to figure out is, one, do they actually need a solution to this problem you outlined? Two, do they have a solution right now? And if they do, how's that solution working for them? Because at the end of the day, if they have a really great solution right now that they're entrenched with, they're likely not going to move on from that. But you can still capture some of those prospects, because as you double tap on that curiosity and that pain, you may uncover areas that they're unhappy with their current solution, and you could uncover for them even some areas where they're not getting what they need, which is where your solution could crop in. So I always tend to lead with curiosity. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, the other thing is, if you get that rejection, like, move on. Forget about it and move on to the next prospect, because the next conversation, the more conversations you have, they're just going to get better and better, and you're going to get scar tissue built up and feel more confident and comfortable having those conversations.
Great. Love it. And David has a pretty practical question, or David, if you're in Madrid. Would you send, when you're sending follow-up emails, do you send that in the same thread as a reply, or are you sending net new emails in an entirely new thread?
Yeah, so for us, like, that's also going to depend on the particular use case. So if it's like a general response in the inbox, I'm doing my follow-up just directly through the inbox. If I'm doing a sequence, though, typically what I do and what the sequence is designed to do is you're going to have some emails that are going to be threaded, and then you'll have a new thread start at some point in there. You will eventually net new that thread, but most of your follow-ups are going to be directly in reference to the original email that you sent, because what you want to do email to email, like, let's just say you've got like a quick 3-step email process, right? You do your intro email, then you do 2 follow-ups after that. You want to customize those follow-ups to be really value heavy, because what you don't want to do is just be like, hey, do you have a chance to look at my last email? They didn't. But you can use that opportunity to get something else in front of them that could pique their interest and their curiosity. And now they're like, oh, now I see this, and I see the things that have come before this, and it's all adding value and all contributing to this conversation now.
Gotcha. Let's see, which one we pull from here. All right, you had mentioned at least 15 touches in the sequence. Marshall's asking appropriate time between emails and calls in the sequence.
Great question. Great question. So that's also going to vary on some level depending on the persona that you're going after. With a higher level exec, you might want a little bit more time between touch points, whereas with somebody that's more on the front line, that's going to be a little bit more responsive, a little bit more active in the day to day, you can space those out a little bit shorter. On average, I think it is between a day and 2 days between steps on most of our sequences. But that obviously varies depending on the use case.
Gotcha. BJ's got a future-looking question. Do you see reps using SMS for outbound effectively?
That's a
Ooh,
really good icebreaker. I've got an opinion on that, Andrew. You want to take that one?
So long story short, it's not mainstream yet, and here's why. And I know this because my wife works at Attentive, which does email or text marketing for e-commerce brands. There's so many regulations around texting that there's not too many good solutions for it right now, because texting in itself is an entire solution. That's one side of it, like lots of regulations, a lot of it, how it's handled. I mean, there's entire platforms, billion-dollar companies just on the texting piece, right? So, because that's what it takes. The other piece is like in prospecting. You really want to get random texts from reps saying like, "Hey, let's meet up"? Again, I don't think it's never going to happen, but forward looking, it comes down to the offer. Why does text work for e-commerce and buying products? Because guess what? They text you and they say, "Hey, you left something in your cart. You want 20% off to actually go and buy that?" You're right. Something they already knew you wanted to buy. Sure, I'll do that. Let me click on the link and make that happen. That offer is irresistible. Once again, it's a no-brainer offer. So if we can figure out, and someone's going to figure it out. I don't know who. I would personally love to figure it out. But if someone can figure out how to do that for B2B, amazing, right? Like if you can say, "Hey, take this demo and then I'll give you like a free Tesla or something." Who knows if it's that much of an offer? But yeah, maybe it's an Uber Eats to accept the meeting via text. Who knows? But it has to be a great offer, and that in itself, product idea. Or go tell any engineering friends that that's $1 billion idea right there, because it will happen eventually. It's just coming up with offers and systematizing that and deal with regulations and all that as well.
I love that.
No, sounded like you had something to add there.
No, I completely agree with what Andrew's saying. You know, I don't necessarily see it making too much traction in the near future as far as cold outbound goes, just because of what Andrew said with the regulations and everything. But I have found texting to be a fantastic tool once you're a little bit more deeply embedded in that conversation. You know, you can add, some more personalization there. You know, it becomes more of a one-to-one conversation. So I think there's definitely some use cases currently for using more SMS in your workflow, but for cold folks, I think that's going to be a turnoff.
Makes sense. All right, we are just about at time. James, what's the big takeaway here? I know you had something special for the audience too, so take us home here.
Absolutely. So anybody that's listening into this webinar, if you reach out to me, we will build a sequence for you using Reggie directly. So we'll come in, we'll talk to you, understand who your buyer is, and then we'll actually build that sequence out with you directly. And then, so please, if you have any questions about copywriting, any questions about sequence writing, would love to connect and chat, even if it's just to share some knowledge. Otherwise, that is that. And I super appreciate everybody being here today.
Yeah, thank you everybody for all the great questions. Super engaging. Thank you, James, for all the content. Thank you, Andrew, for weighing in with your expertise. This has been great. Thanks, everybody.